If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Women of Golf Show. I'm Ted Odorico, and joining me is LPGA professional Cindy Miller, and we are your hosts. We're broadcasting live every Tuesday morning from 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern here on the blogtalkradio.com network, bringing you some of the best golfers, teacher professionals, and entrepreneurs helping to elevate women's golf. We're so glad you decided to join us this morning, so grab your coffee and let's get started. All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome once again to the Women of Golf. I'm Ted Odorico, and right alongside, of course, is LPGA professional and Legends Tour player Cindy Miller. Good morning, Cindy.
Good morning, Ted. How are you today?
Well, I'm doing a little bit better. As I mentioned to you off air, I'm kind of getting over a little bit of illness, but nothing too tragic, so hopefully I won't keel over in the middle of our broadcast this morning, but I think I'll be fine. We got a great show, everybody, and thank you again for joining us live. We're going to be joined here in just a moment by become a good friend, really, of the show, Mike Nichols, the Chief Business Officer of the Symetra Tour. He's been an integral part, really, in helping us to showcase some of the very talented young ladies who venture out each season on the Symetra Tour, and he's going to help us launch yet another season. I believe he said his 8th season at that juncture, so we're very, very excited to help him launch it, and we're looking forward, beginning next week, hosting some of these young ladies who are going to come out and do battle out on the Symetra Tour. So I guess, Cindy, without any further ado, let's welcome our special guest this morning, Mike Nichols, Chief Business Officer of the Symetra Tour.
Good morning.
Good morning. Happy New Year to you both. If we can still
Happy
say
New
Happy
Year.
New Year in March. If we can say Happy New Year in March, but it's a new year for us on the Symetra Tour with the season starting this week. So we'll say Happy New Year just this one last time.
We're all for that. Cindy, go ahead. I'll let you start off.
So what scoop, news, excitement do you have that you believe is going to happen in 2020? Tell us.
Oh, the scoop. Well, see, this is like a dangerous place. You know, everybody always says, well, who are the players to watch? And I think that kind of is what makes each year so interesting, is because we really don't know, to be honest with you, who's going to finish in that top 10. And, you know, with the last couple of years, the player of the year has been a rookie. So it's been a player who hasn't been with us. And as we see in women's golf right now, the players are getting younger and younger and having success at an earlier age. So it's really hard to make any sort of predictions, and that's just not me being cagey. Maybe I should be, just because in my role you don't want to pick favorites. But the one thing I'll say is that in my 8 years, the depth of talent right now on the Symetra Tour is so much greater than it was when I started. So like my first year on tour, we played 15 times, and we played for about $1.6 million. And if you won at one of those 15 tournaments, you pretty much were guaranteed to have a spot on the Symetra Tour. And then even a couple years ago, we had somebody who won a couple of times, twice on tour. Unfortunately for her, it didn't happen in our bigger purse events, but she didn't end up getting her card. So what really has to happen right now is we'll play 20 times this year for an average of $180,000 purse, which is the highest in tour history. But players are going to have to be consistent, because that's what it takes, you know, to make it into that top 10 on the Symetra Tour. And then, you know, that's good, because that's what it takes to be successful on the LPGA Tour as well. So we're sort of like the football fan who has all the promise at the beginning of the season for their NFL team to be good. Or spring training is probably the better analogy right now, because we're in the middle of spring training and every team is, 0-0 and hope springs eternal. So that's kind of how it is the Symetra Tour. It's a new season, and we'll see who rises to the top.
Let me ask you, how many players, and you may not know the answer to this, have gone through the Symetra Tour? How many members are there of the Symetra Tour total for 2020? Whether they're exempt, whether they're not exempt, total.
Yeah, so I don't know the exact number because we sort of take memberships up. Like there's some players who are still hurt who haven't signed up for membership, but we typically have about 300 players who take membership. And I think last year, I do know this because I just asked our statistics lady who runs statistics for us, that like 263 different people got starts on the Symetra Tour last year. So obviously in some cases there'll be people who have one start because they're a local player and the tournament's in their hometown, that kind of thing. But I think you can realistically look and say, that of those members, probably 250 of those players are members who got starts in fields up to 144 players. So there's a lot of players who are, just looking for their opportunity in many cases.
And let me ask you this. Of the 260, how many years does it typically take for them to become one of the top 10 or to qualify for some kind of eligibility on the LPGA Tour? How many really move forward? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I mean these are good questions. I didn't realize I had to be so prepared this morning, but But typically, I think the last couple of years, and I have to double check this, but approximately sort of in the range of 5 or 6 of the players who've been in the top 10 were rookies. Now, last year was different. We actually had a number of players last year who were not even rookies on the LPGA Tour. Some of the players ended up going back to the tour. So you had a player like Julieta Granada, and she's an interesting story because Julieta Granada, as people remember, her rookie year on the LPGA Tour, she became sort of the $1 million baby when she won the ADT championships and the $1 million first prize, and that was her only win, and she struggled with injuries and whatnot, and she had partial status last year on the LPGA Tour and came out and played fairly well in the first couple of Symetra Tour events and really committed herself to playing full-time on the Symetra Tour once she realized, hey, if I just stick this out, I'm going to finish in the top 10 and sort of be able to set my schedule next year on the LPGA Tour. So it's we're seeing definitely more, I would say the younger players are finding success much earlier, but we're also having players who are coming back, again, due to injury or swing struggles. I mean, we all know how fleeting the game of golf can be, and so it's sort of an interesting blend of players right now on tour, which makes it interesting because if we look at our field list and see, hey, this week in Florida's Natural, there's a number of players in the field who have name recognition on the LPGA Tour, and they may get beat by a bunch of players that people necessarily haven't heard of because we've got young players coming in from all over the world. I mean, by my own admission, Hannah Green, who I think she finished about 3rd on our money list 2 years ago. I'd never heard of Hannah Green before she arrived, and the year after she graduated from our tour, she won the KPMG Women's PGA Championship, one of our majors. So sort of a little bit to your sort of initial question, Cindy, is what we're finding is that the players that were graduating from the Symetra Tour are finding success a lot quicker. Back in 2013 when I started, frankly, we were just hoping that our players that we were graduating would make the cut. And this last year, we had, Nelly Korda won a couple of times, Celine Boutier won a couple of times, Hannah Green, as I mentioned, this year, Madeline Sagstrom won our new tournament down in Boca Raton, and she was our 2016 Player of the Year. So the players are finding success much earlier than they did in the early years, which is good because that says, that whatever we're doing in terms of course setups or the level of competition that's on the Symetra Tour that's happening when they get to the LPGA Tour, it's not markedly different, and that's ultimately what you want to see.
That's awesome. Thanks. I am asking all these questions because we now have one of our students that, I'm her golf mother, and she is down in Florida working on her game, just graduated from college, wants to play on the Symetra Tour, but doesn't want to turn pro. She's not quite ready. So, again, it's an expectation thing. And you want to say the level of how much you put in is hopefully going to be delayed gratification in what you get out of it. So thank you for that. Ted, go ahead.
Yeah, and one other thing I'll just mention, and this is maybe a little bit more inside baseball, but one of the things that we found is that, as I mentioned, so we have 250 players, 144 of which are, playing week in, week out. So you have sort of 100 players who are sitting on the sidelines and may not necessarily get reps. And, you as you all know, that you can't play good golf without getting tournament reps. There's a long way from the driving range or even just, playing around with family and friends, the $5 Nassau to playing tournament golf. So we established an official relationship with the WAPT, the Women's All-Pro Tour, where players on the Symetra Tour who aren't in the Symetra Tour event that week can play on the WAPT Tour and possibly play their way into a Symetra Tour event. We don't have Monday qualifiers, so it's sort of serving as a Monday qualifier for us, but it's also, we found when those players who've played the WAPT finally get into a Symetra Tour event, they're performing much better than they do when they come in cold. Their events are 72-hole, 4-round events. So that's a partnership. It's in its second year this year, and it's almost for us sort of a service to our members to say, not everybody's going to get into some of these early events, and in many cases it's a function of how they played in Q School, which, as everybody knows, is sort of a 4-round Russian roulette, and for whatever reason you might play poorly on one of those 4 rounds, and guess what, you can't play on the Symetra Tour. But opportunity to play your way in, and we found players who played in those events, won them, and played into the Symetra Tour events as members, ended up reshuffling and keeping their cards. So it was a successful partnership and might be sort of a good opportunity for your student to sort of see where her game is sort of against that second tier of Symetra Tour players without necessarily diving into the deep end.
I didn't even know that existed, so thank you so much. That's awesome.
Yeah, great for sharing that. Thank you, Mike. And yeah, Cindy, those are some great questions. We're going to put you on the spot this morning, Mike. So I hope you're prepared.
I'll see what I can do. Cindy's already got me to hit me with some zingers. I feel like I'm up here on the debate stage getting pummeled.
Sorry.
Just keep in mind, Mike, it was Cindy that asked those questions, not me. So.
Right. Exactly. Well, hopefully I did my best debate. I did my best debate pivot I don't know the answer, so I'm going to go talk about this. So hopefully I did a good enough job with that to make people believe I know what I'm talking about.
You did fantastic, as always, Mike. Thank you. I just want to play off the players for for just a second, because there was one particular that caught my eye very early this season on the LPGA, and that was Perrine Delacour from France. She was, of course, among the group of Volvic race for the card winners last season, and she was actually on our show multiple times last year because I guess she won a few times, but she had a really good showing in one of the very early. In fact, I think it might have been the first event this season on the LPGA. She was at one point sort of in the second to the third placing, if you will, early in the tournament, and ultimately I think she finished number 10 in the top 10. So she had a very, very good showing. So would you agree that that's really a testament of the quality of players coming off the Symetra Tour?
Well, yeah. Well, so Perrine, I believe, was a graduate a number of years ago from the Symetra Tour. So she sort of graduated twice. So last year, you're correct, she ended up being our Player of the Year. So she was number 1 on the Volvic race for the card. She ended up being our Player of the Year. But what was interesting is I believe she won twice last year, which were her first 2 professional victories anywhere in the world. So, a number of years ago, I think it was around the time that I started with the tour, so 2012, 2013, I think she graduated onto the LPGA. So she sort of played the LPGA and probably played at a little LET. But last year was the first time she'd actually won professionally, won twice. And I think that sort of confidence, I mean, you talk to a player, I've never won a professional golf tournament. I've never won any golf tournament. But, you listen to players and they talk about like how, you have to be there enough to learn what it takes to win and how to handle the nerves and the mental and all of that kind of stuff. So I think, when you look at that, I think Perrin is probably a much better player now after having competed against what was most certainly better competition, in 2019 on the Symetra Tour than when she graduated the last time. But now also she knows that she's won against that competition. She's beaten players like Julieta Granada, who's won on the LPGA Tour. And you start sort of looking and saying, if I can beat these players and win out here, I can do it out there as well. And that, that kind of goes back to where the conversation started with Cindy, is we're finding that our players, once they get up there, seem to have a different level of confidence in their game and are finding success. Whereas, like I said, back in 2013, we would just be looking at our play. When we open up the leaderboard, you'd immediately go to the cut line and see how many players were above it or below it. And now you can really start, from the top and see, there's Nelly Cordo, there's Perrin Delacour, there's Celine Boudia, Hannah Green. Our players who've graduated from the tour are regularly in the top 10, which is, if you told me that, 5 years ago, I would have said you're crazy. But that's, right, a testament to our rules staff for setting up the golf courses more like we find on the LPGA Tour, and it's frankly a testament to the players that we've been able to attract. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we've raised purses and we've created a geographic flow for the tour that makes it friendly to players who aren't necessarily Native Americans, or excuse me, not Native Americans, but American citizens who come over here maybe for college and want to stay because they realize, hey, this is something I can do. I can rent a car and travel along. And when people say, so what sort of changed it, I really point to when Madeline Sangstrom back in 2016, she played 12 times and won close to $170,000, which, isn't, in the world of golf, that's not a ridiculous amount of money, but if you're just driving around and playing out of the trunk of your car and staying in host housing, the players say it costs about $50,000 to do that over the course of a Symetra Tour season, and she won $167,000. And I think a lot of players around the world were like, wow, she did that, and she didn't even play in 2/3 of the events, and she set the all-time money list record. So I think players looked at that and said, well, if I'm a good enough player, I can go over there, make $100,000 and find my way onto the LPGA Tour. And so by attracting that higher level of talent, obviously better talent produces better graduates and better competition week in, week out.
Yeah, well said. And just one final thought about, Perrin and you mentioned Julieta. I know when we talked to them last year, one of the obviously advantages that they did have is they both had been on the LPGA before, even though they had come back through Symetra last season. So they had somewhat of a clear insight of what to expect, where some of the newer players haven't maybe had that experience yet. So it obviously gives them a clear advantage. And I think that's why you see them, particularly the second time around, like Perrin. I didn't watch the whole tournament, but I watched quite a bit of it. And, she really shone out there. And ultimately, to finish in a top 10 in a major, not a major tournament, but on a major stage like that, it says a lot to the caliber of player that she was, and is, rather. But, it just really tells a lot about the Symetra Tour. I want to ask one other question about the players, and then I want to talk just a little bit about the sponsorship and so forth. But, I know that obviously you want to really encourage and attract more, young women to golf. Does the Symetra Tour, along with the players, what sort of opportunities do you help to create or work together with these players to really reach back into their communities and help really a lot of young girls that may be looking at them and saying, hey, not necessarily they're going to make it out on tour themselves, but to help them really pursue their dreams? Because obviously these girls have decided that, golf is what they want to do. Does the Symetra Tour help play a role in that to help them encourage to reach back into their communities and inspire other young women to do the same?
Well, I think the good thing is, and the nice thing is that I think our players are role models without us cajoling or, asking them to be. Both on the LPGA and Symetra Tour, I think, obviously both having been to LPGA Tour events, see how approachable our players are, and giving high fives to young girls they see on the ropes and staying to sign autographs afterwards. The accessibility of our players, both on the LPGA and then obviously the Symetra Tour, where the crowds aren't as big and you can get up close and personal with the players. But I don't think there's a player who is in our plays on the Symetra tour, who, whether it's here in the U.S. or maybe where they grew up playing in Australia or Europe, who doesn't sort of see themselves on the rope line, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever it was, and remember their experience of going to their first LPGA or women's professional golf tournament somewhere else in the world, and being inspired by some player who gave them an autograph or gave them a high five, gave them their glove, gave them their ball, whatever the case might be. So we don't. I don't want to say that we don't. We obviously encourage it, but it's not something that I feel like we really harp on or anything like that, because
right.
the players remember being that young girl on the ropes, and as I mentioned, I'm sure on this show before, because it's my favorite Symetra Tour story. But the first player that I ever met when I joined, literally the first player I met when I came aboard on the Symetra Tour was a player who had been inspired to play golf because she attended a Symetra Tour event in her hometown 15 years earlier and had never picked up a golf club prior to going to that event. And next thing she becomes a member of the golf team at Wake Forest on a full ride, and a Symetra Tour member, never made it to the LPGA Tour. But that's my favorite story about the Symetra Tour, and that's to your point, we're not necessarily trying to create LPGA players, but just the next
right.
generation of golfers.
Right, exactly. And I suspected that. I just was curious if, obviously, again, I know you're not, as I said, cajoling them or trying to, other than an encouragement whenever possible. But I was just curious whether or not you find that that's something that they sort of are doing on their own, or if that's something that, or if there are opportunities through Symetra to really be able to talk about their journey, along the way. So that was really where my question was coming from. I want to just very quickly, and then Cindy, I'm going to pass it back to you. I want to just talk, and I'll sort of try to wrap these two into one sort of question, if you will, about sponsorship. Obviously, Mike, as well as I do that sponsorship is, obviously an integral part of the tour's success. What do you see for the sponsors in today's Symetra Tour product, if you will, as opposed to 8-10 years ago? What do you see? Obviously, purses have increased, but what do you see as what's being offered today to sponsorships as opposed to 5 to 10 years ago?
Well, I think it's sort of twofold, and this may seem sort of odd as an answer for sponsors, but because of the success we've had with the tour and building out the schedule and getting access to better golf courses, sort of better golf courses breed better golf courses. So when I started with the tour, you'd maybe go talk to a private country club and say, are you interested in having a tournament? And then they'd look down the list of other places that you're playing and think, well, is that really the company I want my country club keeping? Because they, without being disrespectful, they weren't sort of necessarily always the highest caliber venues. And I think so now,
sure,
because of the success we've had with the tour, people are interested in the Symetra Tour, which allows us access to better venues, which now you're saying to a company, hey, would you be interested in affiliating your brand with the Symetra Tour on this golf course? And I can assure you that the quality of that golf course is a big consideration when it comes down to whether a corporation wants to put their name on a tournament. So I would say that's sort of the first part. And then sort of second part, not to be too repetitive, but the caliber of play, when we can point to players, like Nelly Korda, Hannah Green, and Celine Boutier and Perrine Delacour having success, it's when you can point to your recent graduates and say, hey, just so you know, these players were on this Symetra Tour last year or 2 years ago. So I don't know who these players are currently right now, but I can assure you that this caliber of player is in this field. So in sponsoring this tournament, you're going to be a part of launching the career, or in some cases for LPGA players who come back, sort of relaunching their career onto the LPGA. So there's so much of a finer line right now between the play on the LPGA and Symetra Tour than at any time in its history. You can say to a sponsor who maybe doesn't have, the multi-million-dollar budget to sponsor an LPGA Tour event, you can have LPGA Tour caliber play, in your backyard and be a part of. Maybe it's a little bit different that they're not sort of the stars now, but you're a part of certainly launching their careers and being a part of sort of the women's empowerment story that's out there so much right now in corporate America.
And just one final thing on sponsorship. Obviously the funding is a premium, of course, to to be involved. But what are some of the other roles that sponsors play in hosting events?
It really varies from place to place, but we have 4 tournaments that are held in partnership with casinos. So they not only serve as the title sponsors, but all of the parties will take place at the casino and sort of their banquet facility. And if they have a hotel, the players will stay in the hotel as well as the sponsors. And in many cases, their employees will provide us with host housing for our players or come out and volunteer. So it's we found that with the tournaments, the title sponsors are much more interested in just writing a check. They sort of see it as a community experience, and that community is not just sort of the external community, but sort of their internal employee community as well. So it's become something of great pride within the companies that sponsor us. And we always say, when we talk about host housing and things of that nature, a lot of people are like, oh gosh, that's going to be a pain to arrange for host housing and find players, people who want to do that. But we really find that that's becomes in many cases the glue that helps keep an event in the community. Because when you take these players off of the golf course and you put them into the homes of people in the community who are in many cases influential members of the country club, possibly employees at your title sponsor, that becomes the thing that in many cases sort of keeps the connectivity to the event throughout the year, because those players are communicating with those folks. And even though the event might only be that 1 week a year, it helps us create the connectivity the other sort of 51 weeks of the year.
All right. Sounds good. Cindy, go ahead.
How big a role does diversity and inclusion play in obtaining sponsors? Does that matter?
Oh, it's certainly huge. I mean, there's so much focus right now in the media and in corporate America around, the amount of money that's been spent on men's sports versus women's sports. I mean, it's maybe 0.5%, or something like that when you look at sort of the global spending on men's sports versus women's sports. So that's certainly helpful, but at the same time, while that sort of in many cases can be a door opener, the sponsorship still has to deliver value to the corporation. So while we may get the initial look because somebody may say, look, we need to sort of start spending in the women's sports space, and hopefully the LPGA is top of mind in that decision. But at the end of the day, whether it's the marketer or the business development person, they've got to be able to justify the decision on why they want to spend on the LPGA or for Symetra Tour. So I would say more than anything, it's a door opener, but the decision can't be made solely on that. And the good thing is that in terms of the value that we deliver, we feel pretty good, whether it's the Symetra Tour or LPGA Tour, in terms of being able to deliver that value to the sponsor. But it certainly doesn't. There's without question, it does not hurt in any way that's so much of the current discussion point in corporate America.
Sounds good. And this is like coming out of left field. What's your favorite part of your job?
Oh, that's easy. That's the Sunday when we hand out the 10 cards, because it's almost like if we can all possibly harken back to the day that we sort of finished the last test of our last day of college, right? And it was sort of and getting sort of conferred. Your diploma would be conferred in the next couple of days, and to sit, to sort of stand up there at the podium and look out at the 10 players who have, just graduated and, either achieved their dream or, again, like a player like Julieta Granada, found their way back and sort of, dug it out of the dirt, as Ben Hogan said. That's cool because they've got their family and friends. And I sort of think about, I've got a daughter who's 12 years old, and thought about as when I'm up there, it's hard for me not to see my daughter in the faces of those, young ladies out there, and sort of think, wow, how proud the parents must be to see their daughters achieve their dreams. So there's no question that's definitely the most rewarding time of the year, because we get to celebrate it with all of the staff too, who've been out on the road for 20 plus weeks, pulling it all together. It's a long grind, but that day makes it worthwhile for everybody.
Awesome. Ted?
Mike, let me ask you, it kind of reminds me of something I know we talked about last year, and, there was some stretches, one particular, I think, where you had, if I'm not mistaken, there was 7 or possibly even 8 tournaments back-to-back. Is this going to be similar this season, where you're going to have some long stretches?
Yeah, I mean it's it's sort of unfortunately unfortunate that there's from about the Memorial Day to Labor Day time frame, that's the one sort of window of time where you can play anywhere in the country. So for those places in the Northeast and Midwest, and in some cases we're now sort of moving up to the Northwest as well. There's only so many times of year that you can play in these places. So we're fortunate that we have a lot of demand. We try to take some weeks off where we can, but if a sponsor or golf course is ready to go, and we're now, as new events are coming on the schedule, we have a minimum threshold of $200,000 purse. So where we might at one moment be looking at possibly having a week off when we're able to sell in a new title sponsor and these ladies are able to play for something north of $200,000. We're going to forego the week off to give them a place to play, and some of them will have to take that week off, which will provide opportunities for others. And that's part of being a professional golfer, is learning what your body can do, and how you got to schedule your breaks even when there might be a tournament, and you have to be content sitting at home watching the LPGA tournament on the couch while some player behind you jumps you on the money list because it was in your physical and mental best interest to take a week off. So it's definitely hard on the staff, it's hard on the players, but that's part of being a professional golfer, is figuring out when to take weeks off to rest and what to do on those weeks off and all of that kind of stuff. So it's unfortunate that we put the players in that position, but at the same time it's nice to have that problem, because I can assure you, when I started with the tour and we had only 15 events, back then it was like, when do you want to play, and we'll throw you on the schedule. Now we have much less supply, and so that's a good place to be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. Let me just ask you one final question, and this is not really. I'm not looking for necessarily a specific answer, but obviously this has been in the minds of a lot of people here in recent weeks. Obviously, we have the coronavirus that people are dealing with, and fortunately, touch wood, it has not become as big of a problem here in the United States. But is that something that those of you in the tours have talked about, like maybe put together sort of a contingency plan in the event if something were to manifest to a bigger, a bigger situation? What do you do? How do you handle a situation like that if suddenly, travel becomes a tougher issue for players?
Well, you may or may not be aware that we on the LPGA side, we had to cancel 3 tournaments in Asia due to the coronavirus, and just sort of being, sort of precautionary and making sure that that was in the early stages of it. And so we've already canceled 3 LPGA tournaments, but here domestically at this point, we feel pretty confident that with sort of the typical precautionary measures. So we meet on it fairly regularly. We met on it yesterday. We'll meet on it again tomorrow. So we're certainly taking it seriously, and in many cases, just following the lead of the government and the CDC in terms of what we're going to do. But taking precautionary measures of sort of just having hand sanitizer at every turn, and encouraging players, volunteers, etc., to wash your hands and be diligent and things of that nature. So we're fortunate that no players will have been precluded from coming into the States to play on the Symetra tour. So we're fine as far as players getting in, but there's 100%. We are closely monitoring it, and hopefully it'll sort of get contained, and we'll have a vaccine here shortly. But in the meantime, we're definitely being diligent and having all of those sort of conversations about what can we do to limit contact potentially of players and fans and things of that nature. Less of a concern on the Symetra tour given the scope of the events,
sure,
but definitely on the LPGA, something that we're looking at as the season, sort of the domestic season, starts rolling in Arizona in a couple weeks.
Right, exactly. Well, thank you for that. Cindy, any final thoughts or questions before we let Mike go?
I am good. Thank you for spending time with us and answering those difficult questions. Have a great season.
Thank you so much, and as always, we appreciate your support, and look forward to having our winners and top players join you throughout the season. So appreciate your support and helping to tell the story of the Symetra Tour and these fantastic athletes.
Well, we thank you, Mike, and appreciate it. And we always love having you come on the show to kick off the season. We'll have you on again, I'm sure, throughout the season, and particularly to wrap up once it comes to a conclusion. But thank you very much for coming on and answering some questions and spending some time with us this morning.
Sounds good. Have a good weekend here.
All right, thank you, guys. All right, that was Mike Nichols, Chief Business Officer of the Symetra Tour. And Cindy, it sounds like they've got a good game plan for the season, and obviously he's excited to get things going next week.
Absolutely.
Sounds good. Well, Cindy, you know what time of the show it is. It's time to enter the no BS zone once again. But I thought before, since we hadn't done this the first couple of shows, that we would play a promotional spot that you have done. And we'll do that first, and then we'll get back into our discussion.
Sounds good. So have a listen.
Everyone knows business deals are made on the golf course. Knowing how to act is just as important as how you hit it. As an LPGA professional and corporate trainer, I offer workshops, seminars, and executive retreats to teach you how to do both. From the back nine to the boardroom, improve your team from the inside out, or Golf 101 for executives might be the perfect fit for your team. Maybe it's time to make some deals on the course. For more information, go to cindymillerinc.com.
And be sure to do that at the end of the show. Go to cindymillerinc.com, and you can check out all of her different things that she has on her website, and you can reach out to her there. All of her contact information is on that site as well. All right, as I mentioned, Cindy, we are going to enter once again into the no BS zone. And this week, we are going to continue on the discussion. Last week, we talked about the beginner golfer with the beginner's guide. And this week, we're going to talk a little bit about what an intermediate golfer needs. So that's a little bit better player, and I'm going to give you some examples of things that might differ from a beginner and an intermediate. But let me just tell you a little bit about this, and then we'll begin our discussion. An intermediate golfer has worked hard to go beyond beginner status. They break 100 fairly easily and even break 90 on a regular basis. An intermediate golfer understands that hitting down on the ball makes it go up with the iron, so you're starting to make consistent contact with the ball. You are beginning to understand the details of swing plane and club head path and the keys to getting to be a really good golfer. So those are some key points that intermediate golfer has a little bit better knowledge, if you will, and just some interesting facts, Cindy, just statistics that have sort of been compiled together between our beginner and intermediate golfers. Again, the average score is 100 plus for our beginning golfer and anywhere from 85 to 100 for our intermediate. As far as warming up an hour before playing, this is something, Cindy, that beginners never do. Or very, very rarely. Intermediate golfer, maybe. So there's a little bit different there. As far as pre-shot routines, again, beginners seldomly, if ever, have a pre-shot routine. And again, sort of a maybe, if you will, for our intermediate golfers. So I think one of the things, and I want to get your thoughts here as far as our intermediate fundamentals, if you will, of becoming a better player. And that is really something I've heard you talk about many, many times, and that is really learning how far you hit each club. Would you agree with that? And talk a little bit about that, why that's important.
Well, I think, let's back that up a little bit. I think it's really important that you learn your own personal pre-shot routine. How do you plan, prepare, and produce a shot? And once you become consistent at that, then you start to watch to see how far is the ball going. And then you would write that down and make notes and maybe have a little spreadsheet or graph that would tell you, I hit this club 50 yards, this club 60 yards, what do I need to do to hit it 100 yards? So absolutely, I agree.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, and again, obviously as golfers progress, and we'll talk about our more advanced golfers and even our professional golfers in later discussions, but, one of the things the other thing that we quite often see with our amateur golfers particularly is playing within their own capability. This is something almost never done by beginners, and again, maybe or occasionally done with intermediate golfers. So as the golfer improves, they begin to understand and play within their own means. And obviously learning how far to hit each club is going to help them better prepare as they continue to transition a little bit further on. And one thing, mentioned already was developing a consistent pre-shot routine. This is something that really, Cindy, as well, playing out on tour for a number of years, that if you don't have a good pre-shot routine, it's very difficult to organize yourself while you're out in the golf course. Would you agree with that?
Without a doubt. And you know what I've noticed, because we do so many boot camps and playing lessons with people, I don't think I ever realized how much thinking there is and thought control and focus that needs to happen on the golf course. And when I take someone that's new, I'm like, well, how would they know that they need to do that? And what I'm talking about, purchased Operation 36. So we're going to start our programming in the spring. And Operation 36, they believe that everyone should be able to shoot even par, which is 36 for 9 holes from 25 yards. Then you move back to 50 yards, then you move back to 100 yards. And I fell in love with their mindset, if you will, because people need to be aware of, how far is this? Well, what do I need to go over? All the obstacles in front of you. So knowing how far you hit the ball and what obstacles are in front of you and what you need to do and what the weather's doing and what's the wind doing, what's your lie look like, all these things are incorporated into planning, preparing, and producing a shot. So pre-shot routine is really important, knowing how far you hit the ball. I just think, yes, everyone should start at 25 yards and move in and try to shoot even par from there, because it's going to help you be successful, and you're also going to realize how important chipping and putting is. So I kind of went off topic right there, but, forgive me, but I think it's really important.
You answered that quite well. And just again, you've been, for the last several weeks, you've been doing these boot camps. And when you look at some of these players that have come down to join you and Alan in Florida, obviously you saw firsthand how many of them actually even had a pre-shot routine. And so talk a little bit about that. I mean, you had, some of them you may have known from previous boot camps maybe, or other exposure that they've been with you in Alan. But for the most part, did any of them, or did some of them kind of have a routine, and how did you address that if they didn't?
Most of them had a routine, because to be able to go to boot camp, you need to know how to hit the golf ball, because otherwise you'd be horrified, because it's 4 days of 9 to 10 hour days. We start breakfast, then we have 3 hours of instruction, have lunch, and play 18 holes every afternoon. So, but what I find with most golfers anywhere in the world is when you start, you want to hit the ball. And we have to change your mindset that we don't want you to try to hit the ball. We want you to learn how to swing the club, because if you learn how to swing the club, you will always hit the ball. So people are thinking, I've got to try to hit the ball, and then they look at the top of the ball, then they top the ball, then they can't hit the ball, then they try harder to hit the ball, and they're not focused on what they're doing with the tool that will hit the ball if they swing the tool correctly. So I think it's changing the mindset of the player to focus on what they're doing with the club that will make the ball go where they want it to.
Right, exactly. No, it makes perfect sense. And, another area, too, and you really touched on this a little bit just a few moments ago, but, to really become even better than just an intermediate golfer and being able to take it to the next level, and that is really learning good course management. And that's something that a lot of people, I don't think, really understand. You touched about that, but maybe explain a little bit more, if you wouldn't mind, what it really means to be, when you say course management. What are you talking about there?
Well, I believe you need to know your own ability, and what level you're at. So let's pretend we're on a par 3 and it's 100 yards to the hole. Well, and there's a bunker in front of the green. So now we say, well, how far is it to carry the bunker? And let's say it's 85 yards to carry the bunker. And the wind's in your face. So now, well, how far is the 85 yards going to play? It's blowing about 10 miles an hour. So let's say it's playing 95 yards to carry the bunker. Well, now you need to know, well, what club do I carry 95 yards? Now, I would go a step further and say, well, what's past the pin? Is the pin in the front or the back? So let's say the pin is in the middle of the green, and you've got 20 paces past the pin. So now you're carrying 95, but you can hit this ball up to 120. So instead of saying, well, I've got to carry it 95 yards, and then you skink the shot and you bury it in the bunker, let's carry it 115, take the extra club. If you don't hit it perfect, you're still on the front of the green. So it's thinking intelligently, and that goes back to that mindset of I'm trying to hit the ball and I'm trying to knock it by the hole, and it's like, let's take a step back and think this through so that you can play smarter golf and know that I typically am a competitive control freak and I would think the wrong way, but I married a guy who played on the tour for 15 years who was in the top 25 in fairways and greens hit. So he was like the tortoise that would just be intelligent, and he would say, well, now wait a minute, we've got all this room behind the pin. And I'm like, oh, I never thought that thought. Well, hello, get a little smarter. So that's what I mean by course management. What are you not seeing that could make your round way less stressful and have more fun?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because that's a great point, because many players focus on where all the trouble is. They know where the bunkers are. They know, and you certainly have to be cognizant of that. You have to know where the trouble is, but that's what they focus on. They don't focus on that nice open area behind the green that really can act as a bailout if they happen to be a little bit long. Instead, they're thinking, well, just let me get it over the water, or let me just get away from those bunkers. And they don't really put a solid game plan. And what's interesting, I just want to read something here that Jack Nichols once famously said. He said he talks about going to the movies. He's talking about visualization here. He says going to the movies where he precisely builds a mental movie of the shot, complete with intended ball flight, whether it's a draw, fade, high, low, whatever, and he actually visualizes the ball landing on the green and rolling to the hole. So he creates a mental picture. So when he steps up to each shot, he's looking, obviously he's aware of where trouble might be, but he's visualizing the shot, and that's part of his course management, is to be able to visualize that shot. Because if you can't see it in your mind, then it becomes even that much more difficult to try and execute the shot. If you don't know how the shot's ultimately going to look, now it doesn't mean necessarily you're going to hit it that exact way, depending on your ability, but if you can't even visualize it in your mind, then how can you even come close to trying to execute a shot of that caliber? So, you have to sort of build a mental picture, and it can be done very quickly. People, you're not taking an extraordinary amount of time, but you have to get an idea of visualizing that shot that you're about to hit before you actually step up to the ball. So I think that's some very good, sound advice from arguably one of the best players in the world. And the other thing, I think, just right, wouldn't you agree? I mean, and I think, everybody has a different approach to that. Again, you have to find what works best for you. Some people are very, very visual. I'm a very visual person, so for me, those visual cues are important. It would be much easier if I was out on the golf course visualizing what I needed to do and seeing where things are than if somebody tried to explain the hole to me, in the clubhouse. Said, well, when you go to this par 3, this is what you're going to see. I have a harder time visualizing it in my mind until I actually see it. Because for me, then I can start to pick the shot and say, okay, here's what I want to do, and here's where I need to land the ball, to set myself up, again, depending on the par hole it is, but to setting myself up for the next shot. So visualization is extremely important, and I think that is, again, part of course management. And the final one is, of course, getting your short game up to par. This is really what makes or breaks, I think, from a very high handicapper to a much better player. Is it's not how far they hit the ball necessarily, but how accurate they are, especially around the greens. Touch a little bit about that as we get ready to wrap up.
It's so true. And I think, I had 3 little boys, 4, 6, and 7 on Sunday. And they're in the U.S. Kids Golf Program, and they're at level 1. And the hardest piece to pass and get your pin is the short game. So what I had them do is stand on the edge of the green and toss balls as if they were hitting a shot with one hand. So if they were right-handed, they were standing there as if they're going to hit the shot, and then just give a little toss. I think it really is helpful for people to get an awareness of how big a swing do I need to take and how hard do I really need to hit this, because taking something off of a shot is almost harder than going full steam ahead. So I think one of the key components of helping you get better at your short game and having feel and touch around the green might be just to toss balls before you ever put a club in your hand. And that'll help you realize, wow, I don't need to give it that much effort to get this ball to end up by the cup. So I think that would help people a lot. Right,
and well said. And just a few more quick points I want to just point out from last week, our beginning golfers to our intermediate, just to show you the difference in how they think. One of the points is whether they check yardage to target for each shot. Beginning golfers never do that. They really don't check. They kind of look with their eye and say, well, it looks like it might be this, and they just pull out a club, whatever they think they might hit that far. And intermediate golfers, again, are in that maybe category. They do it sometimes. They're not, again, as consistent as they should be, but at least they are, to some degree, checking the yardages. But, again, they certainly need to do a better job than that. The other thing is when it comes to lessons, most very beginning golfers, a lot of them haven't taken lessons. They go out there and, maybe they're still trying to see whether they enjoy the game or not, or whether they're going to even, be interested. And I can understand that. But I think, not taking lessons is really doing yourself a disservice. And I'm not just saying this to build up our lesson plans and things like that. But I'm just saying it that if you really want to get into this game, and again, with our intermediate golfers, they may have taken a few lessons, but again, they're not really as focused on that as much. But you really need to get with somebody who's qualified, who can help you sort of put together a game plan, if you will, and work around obviously your schedule, but your abilities, and help you to draw out. I mean, you might be surprised at just how good of a golfer you could be if you had the right instruction. So that's something to really, consider very strongly. And the last one, which was kind of interesting as well, and we're going to see a pattern, because I'm going to talk about the other two as we progress through the weeks, but the average number of greens in regulation. A beginning golfer, it can be anywhere from 0 to 3 greens and regulations, which is not very much, but it's not too bad for somebody that's maybe never played very much. But now we're getting, for intermediate golfers, it's 3 to 8. So now we're getting a little bit more serious as they improve, and they're hitting, again, scoring averaging between 85 and 100 as opposed to over 100 on a regular basis. So they're starting to see some improvement, and you want to build off of that momentum. When you start to see improvement like that, that's the time to really ramp things up and build on that momentum and becoming a better player. So hopefully that helps in this week's edition of the No BS Zone. We're going to give it to you straight each and every week. And Cindy, any final thoughts as we wrap up and get ready to continue on?
Nope, I'm good to go.
All right. Well, we want to thank once again Mike Nichols for joining us this morning, Chief Business Officer of the Symetra Tour. We're, again, excited to help him launch their new season. We should have the very first winner on next week's show from this weekend's Symetra Tour event. I believe he said it was the Natural down in Florida. So we're excited about that. And we will bring you the winner next week. And we will also have another interesting discussion on the No BS Zone. So on behalf of Cindy Miller, I'm Ted Odorico. Thank you, everybody. God bless for joining us each and every week. And stay safe out there. We know there's a lot going on with the coronavirus, so just be smart about it. And if you don't need to do any travel, don't by any means. And if you feel that you're not at your best, then hunker down and consult your professional in healthcare professional if need be. But just be safe out there. Thank you, everybody. God bless, and we'll see you next week on the Women of Golf. Thanks, Cindy.
Thanks, Ted. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening this morning to the Women of Golf Show. Tune in live each week by visiting blogtalkradio.com/Women of Golf or on any of these social media platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, CastBox, TalkStream Live, and of course Spotify. If you can't join us live, check out our on-demand section for previously aired broadcasts. To get updates for future shows and upcoming guests, you can follow us on Facebook at Women of Golf. You can also follow me on Twitter at Ted and Buck CEO and Cindy at Cindy Miller Golf. Please remember to join us next week on the Women of Golf Show. See you next time. This has been a production of the iGolf Sports Network.